Hi there, I'm your host Clive Serkin, and welcome to the Unstuck podcast, where we're on a journey to help you get control of your work environment, get yourself unstuck, and perform to your full potential. Okay, so today is probably more special than any other day in the sense that my guest, amongst other things, and we'll cover a lot of it, is the reason I started this podcast. So Jeff Ragovin, he's an entrepreneur, he's a farmer, he's a culinary fiend, and a podcast host. And he was the guy who badgered me, coerced me, encouraged me, enabled me, and coached my way into this podcast. So I've been waiting to get my game up, so because he's going to be super critical of me, and I think the time is right. So, Jeff, welcome to Unstuck. It's an absolute dream to have you on, my friend.
Well, Clive, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm so happy you finally got this off the ground because I've been listening, and you've been doing a fantastic job. So well done.
I appreciate it. I know every time I saw you, you'd go like, "When are you doing the podcast? When are you doing the podcast?" So I finally had to get off my ass.
You've been a good student, Clive. You've been a great student.
It's a steep learning curve, but we're getting there. All right. So Jeff Ragovin, I think of the man in a triangle. Like there are three sort of vectors. There's more, to be fair. But the things that come to mind is like farming, food, and business.
Yes.
And we got to talk about all three and then how they all intersect, because I know there's an intersection and that's sort of how it evolved. But I think it's really fascinating. Let's start with farming, because that one is the one that came out of nowhere when we started talking. You are involved in South Fork, the Oyster Farm.
Yes.
Talk to me about like how did that happen and why did that happen and what are you trying to get accomplished there?
Yeah. So it's kind of an interesting story. So I live out in East Hampton, on the east end of Long Island, and I've always been a fanatic about the water. So I'm like a hardcore fishing guy. I grew up in New York City, but my parents always had a boat. And so once I moved out here, I got myself a boat too. And, spend as much time as I can on the weekends, fishing and clamming and all that fun stuff. And I don't know, it was one rainy Sunday in the fall about 6 years ago. And I was reading the annual report for the town of East Hampton. And I came across this whole section about this organization it's basically called the Hatchery, the town hatchery in East Hampton. And I started reading about it. And what I found was that apparently this hatchery seeds 20 million oysters and clams, across the harbors on the East End every year. And I thought that was incredible. And I reached out to the guy who's the director, and I was like, "Hey, I just read about this article, and can I come down and see the facility?" And he said, "Sure, how's tomorrow?" And I went down and I met him, and he showed me all of the tanks. And essentially what he does is he essentially is Mother Nature, right? In the wintertime, he spawns clams, oysters, and scallops in Montauk in this kind of indoor facility. And the water temperature, basically, he brings up to 72 degrees and tricks them into spawning. And then they spawn into all these tanks, and then he feeds it with algae. And then by the spring, he has, little, about the size of a dime. They're oysters, clams, and scallops, very tiny. And then he goes and seeds them across all the harbors. And so I thought that was pretty amazing, right? I'm like, this is incredible. I said, "Do you guys get any funding other than the town?" And he said, "No." And so I said, "Hey, can I throw like a fundraiser for you, over the summer?" And he's like, "Well, no one's done that before." And so we threw a big fundraiser and we raised money. We called it Shell It Out. No pun intended, but yeah, there's a pun there. And so we raised all this money for the hatchery. And then, I said to him, I was like, "Hey, is there any programs where people can actually grow oysters?" And he said, "Actually, as a matter of fact, we have this one woman who's approached us and she wants to do it." And I said, "Well, I would love to do it too." And so we started off with just a bunch of people growing oysters in floating cages as a test. And it worked amazing. And so after that first year, we launched a nonprofit called South Fork Sea Farmers, which was really the educational arm of the hatchery, because no one knows about the hatchery, Clive. And we really wanted to put it out there, and we got, a few families to take part in growing oysters. And next thing we knew, we expanded to 5 harbors after 5 years, and we have over 200 families growing oysters. And so what's really amazing about it is it literally cleans the water, takes out nitrogen, provides a lot of food and habitat for, marine life. And it's really fun. I got to tell you, it's every time I meet people and I tell them I'm an oyster farmer, they're like, "Whoa, I've never met an oyster farmer before." And so it's been a really great, I'd say, extracurricular activity. And I've met a lot of people, especially from our industry in ad tech. A lot of people out here have taken part in growing oysters, and it's been fun. And Clive, whenever you get out here, you'll get to have the best oysters on the East Coast.
I'd love to. The only issue is I'm deathly allergic to shellfish. But I'll for sure be out there farming because I can touch the stuff. I just can't eat it. But
All right, so
so
you can
but help me understand. So this is a 501c.
501c3.
So
Yep.
it's a non-profit. So so you're doing this not for the economic outcome. You're doing this because it's great for the environment. Like
Yeah. So out of the 200 families that are growing now, no one is allowed to sell their oysters. You could give them away to friends and family and whatnot, and yourself.
yep,
The whole point of it is really to, you know, provide a mechanism to remove harmful algae and nitrogen from the water. So the reason that hatchery actually became prevalent was in the 80s. There was a massive brown tide that killed everything.
right.
And so the town basically enacted the hatchery to try and restock and repopulate the area with shellfish. And so that was the original idea around the hatchery. What's great about South Fork Sea Farmers is that everyone gets to grow a few thousand oysters every summer, and then the following year, let's just say it's your first summer growing, we'll take back about 200 oysters and we'll seed those full-grown oysters in the bay, and
Got
you
it.
can keep the rest. And so it's this whole kind of fun process of every year you get to grow different stages of baby oysters, mid-sized oysters, and large adult oysters. And our program at the end of the day is really we're trying to educate and raise awareness across the country. Obviously, we're doing it here in the Hamptons, but we want people to actually be able to take what we're doing and apply it to their towns, wherever they are on the coast. Because the more shellfish that's growing out there, the more clean water that
Right.
we actually
Because
have.
if I remember correctly, I think you and I were talking, it's like one oyster filters 50 gallons of water a day.
Got it. That's right.
That's the
A lot.
right number, right? So it's like when you
You were
scale that
listening.
up, no, I'll pay attention every once in a while.
Yeah.
So when you scale that up, I mean, that has a profound impact on the water quality.
That's it. It's an incredible impact on water quality.
And you're bringing kids in from schools and doing all the educational stuff around that.
Oh yeah, I mean we have lecture series for LTV, which is a local television station here. We go into Southampton High School. We've got educators on the board with us now. We're doing a ton of education. If people go to southforkseafarmers.org, they could actually see all the videos. The kids love it. The kids really learn about the environment, marine life, predators, all that fun stuff, and they're delicious.
That's incredible. So, talking about delicious, so I don't know which came first, but I'm assuming the chef, the cook, the culinary expert preceded the oyster farmer. But you, I know, are insanely involved in food, and in fact, you wrote a cookbook, which I'm still waiting to get. Um, talk. Let's talk about that. How did that happen, and when did
So
that happen? Because in part of what I want to talk about is you've taken that from a passion to business, and I want to talk about how you transitioned into the digital fork. But before we get to digital fork, where did the food thing come from?
Well, I mean, the food thing, I don't know. I lived in London when I was studying abroad in undergrad in the late 90s. And, it was expensive to go out to restaurants as a, 20-year-old, right?
Yep.
And I was working at a company called Powerhouse Television and Film in Soho in London. And I'd walk from West Kensington to Soho every day, going to work and coming home. and I walked through these like incredible farmers markets, and they had like the most amazing produce and meats and all sorts of stuff. And I think that was really where I've always been interested in cooking, but I think that's where I really started to hone in on my skills. And I would buy really fresh produce. And what I found interesting is in London, like the refrigerators are very small there. It's not like the US.
Yeah.
And so you really need to buy what you need on a daily basis or a bi-daily basis. And so I used to cook for all my flatmates, and I really got into it, and I started to really kind of fall in love with cooking. And once I graduated from undergrad and moved back to New York City, I got even more excited about it. And I think I even was like, yeah, I want to open a restaurant. Right when I had graduated. So the food thing has always been in my blood. Um, but the digital fork, which is an amazing dinner series, like that came out of kind of post Salesforce life.
Right. But wait,
Um,
but before you missed the whole part over there. So like let's rewind. So you self-taught, okay?
yeah,
Okay.
self-taught.
Self-taught, and so as one normally does, it's like, well, let's write a cookbook. Is like, how did that happen?
Well, no, so the cookbook came from the digital fork.
Ah, okay. That
Yeah, I
makes
didn't
sense.
just say Clive. I wasn't like randomly like, yeah, let's produce a cookbook. The cookbook came from the
Got it.
digital fork dinner series, which was something that I launched. After I sold Buddy Media to Salesforce, I left Salesforce after 3 years post acquisition, and I started Ragovin Ventures, which was really the venture arm of what I was doing next, and investing in really interesting companies in the marketing and advertising space. And for a moment, I said, "Holy shit! I'm literally out of the game." At least being at Salesforce, I was with clients on a daily basis and understanding their needs. But once I left, it was a different world. And so I launched the Digital Fork, which is this dinner series where I'm like, you know what? I'm going to bring in 16 CMOs, sit them down at a beautiful restaurant, 5-course meal, amazing wine, and I'm just going to have an open dialogue on what's important to them, what are they tracking, what is not important to them, where are they investing, so that I know where I could invest my money into smart startups. And so that actually took on a life of its own, because after that first dinner, I kind of just held the dinner as if I would have had a dinner with friends, right? There was no real format, but I didn't want to have a dinner of everyone just eating and talking at the same time. So I really came up with a theme and went around the table and had everyone take part in the conversation. And by the end of the night, it's like we had 16, friends that became family in a matter of 3 hours. And I'm like, whoa, I think there's something here. Like there is a future of this dinner series in multiple facets. And so, from there, I did another dinner, and I think I just had the 55th dinner
Oh,
last week in Scottsdale, Arizona, and it's been really incredible because we probably had about 600 CMOs come through that dinner series, and it really has built this amazing community of not just strategic thinkers, but movers and shakers, and everyone gets to build their own community from that dinner. And so, yeah, I put together this really beautiful cookbook for the digital fork. There's a lot of recipes that are mine, but then there's also a lot of recipes from some of the famous chefs that we've had at their restaurants, like whether it's Gramercy Tavern or Per Se. There's profiles on the chefs, and even the Oyster Farm is in the book. But it's a nice little memento to give to people once they finish the dinner. And they could, I've seen it in so many offices on people's coffee tables. And I get a lot of people sending me pictures like, Jeff, I saw the digital fork in this agency or this company's waiting room, which is kind of fun.
and the dinners is a get together, and then you make these connections, and then you're on your own kind of thing. So it's creating this network and creating this community. Do you have repeat offenders?
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, there are people who are like, I really want to go to another digital fork because they love it. Not
What
only do they have amazing food, but they get to meet such great, wheeler and dealers. And so, I think what's really special about the digital fork as well is that, it came from a place where I was getting invited to so many dinners, venture dinners, marketing dinners, brand dinners, and they all sucked. That was the reality. Like, you go to this dinner, you're expecting to meet all these people, but you're literally sitting next to someone on the left of you and on the right of you, and maybe across from you that you get to talk to. And then everyone else at the dinner is having their own side conversations and you don't get to meet them. And so this dinner series is a way to really immerse everybody together. And so you get to meet every single person at that dinner, know about them, hear about them. A lot of people share very personal stories. Some people are very vulnerable. They feel like they could really open up. And that's a really special moment
It's
because
great.
most of these people are strangers, you know?
It's interesting. It's like I was in this conversation with an investor who, a serial investor who's done incredibly well, and they did the analytics to try and determine sort of what was the connective tissue, what was the, if you looked across all the deals that worked well, what was the driving for, was it product, was it the people, was it the, was it the business model? And ultimately it came down to, it was the network and the people who referred the deal. That was the common thread. And so the power of having these kinds of network experiences with the right people, in a curated way, in the way you do it, is like, I think there's a multiplier effect, without a doubt, I would say.
Absolutely.
And it's working. So that's terrific. All right. Well, be sure and send me the cookbook. That's the one thing I've been meaning to
I'm
get a
going to
hold
send
of.
it to you.
So in your spare time, uh, you've had exits I'd say in excess of probably $1 billion. Obviously, the big one being Buddy Media.
Yep.
So, you're studying like mass media, and you're doing your Bachelor of Arts at Oswego, and then you do a couple of gigs, and then you found Buddy Media. You grow that business, you sell it to Salesforce for 800 million, give or take, if I remember the numbers correctly. Talk about that part of the journey. How did that happen? Uh,
With Fyllo?
no, pre-Fyllo, how you went from college to Buddy Media, and
Ah,
and the exit.
oh, okay. Well, yeah, that's a few minutes of a conversation.
A
So yeah, very interesting. I actually went to undergrad to be a meteorologist. Um,
meteorologist.
oh yeah, I don't even know if you knew about
No,
that.
never knew. This is now,
So
things are starting to connect here.
okay, I will send you the videos of me out doing the weather on TV. Um,
That's
it's
incredible.
really funny. It's actually quite funny. I have them, and people are like, "That's not you." I'm like, "Yeah, it is." So yeah, I went to school to be a meteorologist, and when I was graduating, I was just like, you know what? I live in New York City. I don't want to take 15, 20 years of my life to make it to a major market,
Right.
and so I kind of abandoned ship of the meteorology stuff.
So
And
what? Hang on. What excited you about doing that? Like,
weather,
it's not every day you wake up and go, "I want to be a meteorologist."
I've always been fascinated with the weather and the sky ever since I was a kid. Like everything from hurricanes to earthquakes. I mean, I remember in sixth grade, I used to do the weather every morning and like get up on the in front of the classroom and
That's
like
great.
every day I'd write the 8 a.m. temperatures and the forecast. I mean, my teachers loved it, but that was just a thing. I don't know what it was, but I was so fascinated with the sky and the ocean, everything from earthquakes to astronomy to anything weather related, like severe weather. I loved it. A good thunderstorm, loved it. I don't know. I still love it today. Actually, it's people call me Weather Jeff. Um, but yeah, I graduated and kind of abandoned the weather stuff. I said, well, I could still be passionate about it. And I started working pretty much during the dot-com boom, in the early 2000s at Digital Impact, and that was kind of the largest email marketing SaaS platform out there. We went public, and then we were later acquired by Axiom, and so that was kind of my first jump into digital back in 2001, and obviously had this great exit. Left the email space and then went in what I kind of call the next big wave of digital, which was search engine marketing, so paid and SEO. And so I worked for a company there called Acronym Media, really built out their entire agency business. Worked with some of the largest brands out there, from SAP to Four Seasons to XM, and did that for a few years, and yeah, kind of got a little bored. But it was in 2007, that year, that Facebook opened up to the world, right?
Right.
So beyond colleges, and here I am, kind of running a business on search based on intent, right? So people who are searching, in Google and saying, "Hey, I'm interested in a TV." Now there's this platform, Facebook, that you actually can list what you're interested in, and instead of searching on intent, you could search on interest. And
Right.
I just thought that was like game changing, right? Like a platform that actually has data on people and their interests. And so I worked with my team to try and figure out a solution that was kind of combined search and social together, but it was just too early and too hard. And I actually met my two best friends today, Mike and Cass Lazaro, who are my two co-founders from Buddy Media. That's where we really launched, the company in 2007. So I left, my agency life at Acronym, and co-founded Buddy Media. And we really, all we knew was that this was going to be a really big opportunity for brands, to take part in this, new social revolution. And we didn't really have a game plan. We purchased a bunch of companies early on that were kind of gaming within Facebook. And from there, we really created a SaaS platform for brands to be able to launch really incredible experiences within Facebook. Also, at the time, MySpace, which most people don't remember,
Yep.
and then later Twitter. And so we had messaging tools, and then we had content tools. And we spent 5 years of blood, sweat, and tears, and we raised about 100 million. And we sold to Salesforce for just under 800 million in 2012. And so that was kind of life changing. Great exit, one of the largest exits in New York at the time, and very different going to
Well,
Salesforce than running a company.
that's what I want to talk. I mean, so it was 3 years after the deal that you left Salesforce. So you had a decent chunk of time. How dramatic was the change? I mean, you're going from this scrappy, and you were hustle, build up by the media, and then you go into this massive machine, which I'm always in awe of their ability. Um, Whiplash, like how was it? Talk to me about the change.
I mean, yes, I think different. I mean, listen, I think at the end of the day, like I love startups. I love, companies under 500 people. I think once you kind of go to a company like Salesforce, incredible business, amazing products. I think from a human perspective, like Salesforce does a really good job of taking care of their employees with a lot of perks and a lot of benefits. But, at the end of the day, you're also a very small, um, you know, if you think about like a box of Matchbox, you're like one match in that box, right?
Yep.
And so I think even for my team today, it's always it's an amazing feeling when someone on the team lands a big deal, right? And we all celebrate it together, right? When you're part of a big giant corporate company and you land a deal, your smaller team celebrates it, but the larger team doesn't really
I
experience it,
don't
right?
feel it.
And they don't feel it. And I think that's important for especially people on the business side, whether it's commercial, whether it's client services, that it's great when you have the whole company celebrating the win together, because it is not just a single person who got that deal, it's everyone working together. And so I think that's one thing that was somewhat difficult to ingest, right? Because we want to feel part of that. We've moved the ship. Um, and it did feel a little bit like you weren't moving the ship, even though you were, right? I think too, kind of, going to, a quarterly, leadership meeting, it's not 30 people, it's 700 people. It's a lot of
It's
people, right?
scale.
And I
Yep.
think it's hard to be able to really navigate and meet all the people who are part of the org, right? So I came on as Salesforce's chief strategy officer for the marketing cloud, and it was an amazing experience for me just because, I got to really, um, I had to really change or kind of morph into um, something different, right?
In
You
in
have
in
to
what in
prepare
what ways? Like, Wait, so the Jeff Ragovin post that 3 year experience, how did you evolve? Like, what muscles did you build for the better?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of things that you have to change. For me to kind of go and speak at events and write articles, I can't do that anymore, right? At Salesforce, you're a public company, you're a big corporate giant, and you have to make sure that you're literally staying, completely compliant with like your
On
people team.
message.
Oh yeah, I mean, I had to do media training. They're like, Jeff, you can't just go out there and talk. You've got to be media trained, right? So I think even media training, you have to be very careful of what you say. I
Yep.
think even with your teams, you have to be extremely careful. You're not a small startup anymore where everything goes. You are part of a giant corporate entity that is, you know, on the public markets. It's very different, right? There's a lot of things that you can't do anymore, and so it was different. I'm not saying it was bad. It was just you have to change the way that you act and that you change the way that you kind of even speak, right? Like obviously media training, I could go on record right now and say whatever I want. Being part of a big public company, you have to be careful because you could obviously hurt your the stock of your company if you say
Yep.
something incorrectly. So that was a big difference and a big change. I think also, Dreamforce and a lot of the events that Salesforce does, they're very big, very attended events. We're talking hundreds of thousands of people. So even going up on stage and having to, do a presentation to 5,000 people is very different than doing a presentation normally to 500 people, right? And so that too is a lot of practice and a lot of training. I'm kind of that guy that's like, yeah, I'll wing it, or I'm great in front of people, so I've got my deck in order. No, Dreamforce and all of that, it's just like
Rehearsal, rehearsal, rehearsal.
rehearsal, rehearsal, rehearsal. And so, you know, that's we're Clive, you know how it rolls. Like we're
It,
very busy. We have, all of us have 14 meetings a day. We're traveling, we're running around, and so to be able to have to not only create something but then rehearse it over and over and over takes a lot of time. It takes time away from the business too.
it's no doubt about it. But you strike me as the guy who's never happy if you got downtime.
No, I don't like downtime.
You know, but it's interesting because like I've had I've my sort of journey sort of inverted in the sense that I've for the first 25 years of my career it was like large corporate roles. In it's like, and I've always been fighting the structure. And I know I used to drive my CEO nuts because we go and do like the Barclays consumer goods thing, and I'm like, I know what I want to say. I'll say, but like, you got to get it down on slides. We're gonna have to rehearse. And
Right. Yeah.
I'm much
Exactly.
more comfortable. Like my presentation, I think you've seen them is like a picture, like a goofy picture, and maybe 2 words, and then I tell stories of the lines. And it's like I always used to bristle at them trying to sort of push me back into this box and the way they operate,
Hmm.
which has always created sort of tension and friction. But you seem, I mean, I didn't know Jeff pre Buddy, pre Salesforce. The Jeff I know seems sort of thoughtful and um, collected and sort of chill. Is that did that evolve over time, or have you always been that way, just less constrained when you were pre Salesforce?
Yeah. No, I think I've always been the same. I mean, I've always, yeah. I don't think I've changed at all. Actually, kind of. I think that's one thing that I always tell everyone too. It's like, hey, if you have an opportunity to have a big exit and make a lot of money, stay humble. Like, don't be a dick. And I've always had that mentality. I still have that mentality today. We're all people. We're all the same at the end of the day.
Uh,
I think too with celebrities, right? A lot of people get, oh my God, celebrities, they're just like us. Although Clive, I feel like we're kind of celebrity status
Yeah,
ourselves.
no, I mean, of natural. I was gonna, I was gonna say that, but
But you know what I mean?
yeah, yeah, but it's interesting because I remember Chad calling me and saying like he was talking to you, and there was a good chance you were going to come join Fyllo, and he was super psyched about that, and it was like, but it's like, why would you? I mean, you have this incredible exit. Now, granted, young guy, but so many other opportunities. And you made the decision to come join the team at Fyllo, and it's been an unbelievable ride in the
Yeah.
last couple of years since since you've been around, 2 of the 3.5 years, give or take. Why did you come back into the game?
Well, I mean, I actually never left the game. So after I was doing the venture stuff, one of the portfolio companies that I had seeded asked me to come on board as their co-founder, which I proceededly said no like 20 times until I finally said yes. And I built that company out for 4 years prior to Fyllo. And so it wasn't until it was really in the fourth year of the company that I met Chad. We were both on a founders panel in Dallas, and I had never met Chad before. I had heard about him through various circles of friends because we have about 700 people in common, that we've worked with,
Because
but
you're
never
running the
worked.
same circles. And this is, you're talking about social native, right?
Yeah, social
Yeah.
native. And so, Chad and I we became very fast friends, and, we started talking, and he's like, dude, you'd be so good to help me, build out the commercial side and help with M&A and have your expertise in building companies. And I said, well, it's kind of, I got to figure out, you know, I got to figure out how to maybe exit my current company. And so kind of work that out. And I did see cannabis as kind of this massive opportunity down the line. It was still in the early infancy, but I saw it as a big opportunity. And I'm like, you know what? I can take risks at this point in my career and this point in my life. And it sounded like an interesting opportunity. And so I'm like, you know what? I've got nothing to lose. And came on board. And obviously the last 3 years has been like crazy, like massive growth. We've really we've changed a sector without a question.
Right.
And I think that's been the most rewarding part for me is that, we started off with nothing, and here we are 3 years later with a massive company, multiple acquisitions, $100 million in funding, and a great board like you. And
Well,
so it's been very rewarding.
the thing that attracted me, and Chad's is on the next episode, and we're gonna talk at depth about Fyllo. But the thing that intrigued me with the vision of Fyllo and what it's become is that it plays in the cannabis world, but it doesn't touch the flower. Um,
Correct.
it plays in both cannabis and non-endemic, and it comes from a place of it's a technology platform that comes from a place of compliance and data. So it's like this perfect intersection where you're touching all aspects of the business, but built on a compliance platform. So it was fascinating to me to see something that, and by the way, it's a business that's focused on any hyper locally regulated category, of which cannabis is the first, right?
Hmm.
When you talk to Chad, when you saw the conceit of Fyllo, you saw the possibilities.
Absolutely. I mean, literally from day one, I was like, hey, this could be a great opportunity for brands outside of cannabis because the cannabis consumer is, it's an incredible opportunity and a new occasion to market to someone that no one has touched before. We know that people who are consuming cannabis generally are digitally native, they're younger, they spend a lot of money, and they take part in all sorts of things from sports to cooking to, entertainment. And so from this get go, I'm like, we're gonna do this at some point. And obviously, we launched this massive data marketplace, and we've got over 5,000 brands that are buying the data now. And so all of this is really coming to fruition and coming to life very quickly.
And the first, oftentimes less so now because it's become so mainstream, but people tend to have the sort of stereotypical view of the stoner on the couch, right? And when you look at the reality, I mean, to the extreme, I just went to my mom's 90th birthday, and she's a consumer because she has chronic insomnia, and so she has gummies to help her sleep. But the picture of a cannabis consumer is incredibly broad and varied, and I think there's still some people out in the non-endemic world who don't see the breadth of it. Are you seeing that? Are you getting that response, or have we moved beyond that?
I think we've moved beyond that. I mean, I think for us, the in the early days, there was definitely a lot of resistance with a lot of brands being like, "Oh, you know what? We're not that, open to it yet, or we're very conservative." And it's like, look, we're doing something right now that it's not like you have to, have a big piece of creative that's flashing cannabis and cannabis leaves. You don't have to have any creative. right? It's just a matter of targeting the right person and actually using like really good verbs and adjectives to describe what you're doing. Like if it's a water brand, you could talk about being so refreshing, right? You don't have to say anything about cannabis use, like just using verbs. But I think even at this point, Clive, like people like your mom and my mom that are now consuming CBD and other products have opened their mind to the use cases of cannabis that they never thought about before, right? And so I think we have, through COVID especially, we've seen sweeping legalization across the country, especially in the Northeast, right? New York, New Jersey, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Vermont. I mean, this is like people are thinking about cannabis like, hey, everyone talks about having a cocktail after work. Everyone talks about drinking too much and being drunk. Now they're talking about cannabis in a very similar capacity, right?
Yep. But the whole, I mean, and this is for another discussion because we're running close to time, but it's like the evolution of the category just in, my 3.5, 4 years where I've been involved through Fyllo and a couple of other companies that we're both involved in. It's like the growth and the maturation and the sophistication in the categories has been like exponential. And it's been messy and bumpy along the way, but I'm wildly impressed at how sophisticated the categories become and how fast it's gotten there. And you're on the front lines calling on these companies. You get a sniff of that as well, right?
Oh, without a question. I mean, there were companies that, at first were like, yeah, we're not ready for that. And now they're like, hey, we want to buy this data. So it's been fun actually to see it come for full circle for brands that actually did not and would not talk to us for a long time and now have really come around.
It's an incredible evolution. Well, we're going to cover the Fyllo story with Chad next week, but listen, as always, it's great talking to you.
I love talking to you. Anytime.
You're the picture of Unstuck. I mean, talk about a guy who's never not moving. Whether you're in the boat, whether you're at the digital fork, whether you're farming or out hustling, it's just incredibly inspiring. So I really appreciate you making the time to talk for this week's episode.
Well, Clive, it was absolutely a pleasure to be on and honored to be on your show. And keep up the great work.
I'm gonna go and stand by the mailbox and wait for my cookbook.
Send me your address.
All right, man. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
This podcast was brought to you by Screen Dragon. We break down barriers, make work flow, and unlock talent. Visit ScreenDragon.com to see our software in action.